just like physical illness, mental illness can be overcome. We just got to inspire people to believe that.
The mental health community and the firearms industry spent way too much time running parallel to each other without communicating. It's time we change the narrative and destroy the stigma that we both face.
Walk the Talk America presents Guns and Mental Health, a podcast for firearms owners, clinicians, and the curious public. We're back, and we've got all our functional systems working, systems functionally functioning. We're down one member of our troop. He is playing a concert tonight, and that is Brandon. Brandon Covey's not here, but we have Eddie and BB. How are you guys? Happy Friday.
Very well.
Excellent. Another good day.
Yeah, I agree. It is a good day. Mike is away. He would join us, but he's away at the Aspen Institute for Aspen Health. It's a collection of people talking about things in healthcare, and he's representing the firearms community doing this, bridging the gap and suicide prevention stuff. And he had a panel discussion last night. I think he had something else today, and I'm very excited. He said he's doing really well, and he's making lots of contacts, and people are very impressed. So that's pretty cool.
I saw the
As for
pictures of him
me,
there. Looks like he's having a hard time.
yeah.
I'm imagining how many Dumb and Dumber references he can get in because you're heading to Aspen. He was
Aspen, Denver,
California.
Yeah. Big gulps, eh? Well, see you later. I think I did text him. I said, "You had two sets of gloves the whole time." So
about all that 1 in a million talk. Yeah.
We got some really good news that I might now I'm gonna hold on to it actually because nothing's certain, in concrete yet, but we got some new opportunities for the organization, some possible exposure in some national stores, and we are going to have a firearms auction coming up in several months. I don't want to announce that too soon because we're still finalizing things, but we're hoping to raise money by auctioning off unique firearms that have been donated. One I know that I can share has been sneak previewed on Instagram, at least on Mike's channel. I think on the WTTA channel is a Glock that's been laser engraved with our logo in green, and it's really cool looking. So if you're listening, stay tuned for that. That's been a great opportunity for us to raise some money for our cause. I just finished my CCW renewal today. It's my second time I've renewed, so I'm now officially a 10-year concealed carrier. Got an opportunity to pass out some of our literature and stickers there, as well as emotional functioning sheet. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding up the emotional functioning sheet in here. If you want one of those, feel free to reach out and we can email it to you. You can distribute it wherever you want. But the idea is I teach this video series about the 10 core emotions that all human beings have, and how if we know them very well, we can respond very well to our environments. And I wasn't surprised, but the concealed carry course didn't really address the mental preparedness insofar as de-escalation. You go over it a little bit, but at the end, I talked to the instructor and I said, it'd be cool is if we did like just a 10 or 15 minute wedge slide in here about people knowing their emotions really well. And by the way, I have this whole video series. That's a great idea. Talk to the management and we can incorporate that in sometime down the road. So I wanted to talk about this today because we do get a lot of instructors asking for our slides, the WTTA slides to put in, not just about suicide prevention and mental awareness, but upstream from that, which is why we do these podcasts, right? We want to catch people before they get into crises. So it's not just about carrying concealed, but it's really about navigating your environment broadly. And we were talking just a little bit before the show, and I know that we all have moments where we encounter human beings in our lives because we walk the earth with other human beings, and knowing emotions is super important in navigating conversation, negotiation, parenting, boss-employee relationships, and certainly in our world with our patient demographics and our clients who are struggling. So I'm curious now that I've teed that up. share some of your guys' experience, or we can just talk around the horn a little bit about when you've noticed your emotions getting the better of you, and some tips and techniques and insights on how to regulate that, because I think this is what's going to be valuable to the audience.
Yeah, maybe I'll pop in. I mean, because I think something over a number of years, I started working, with adolescents when I was pretty close to that same age, and so I was barely removed from being an adolescent myself, and I was charged with working with this group of, 8 to 12, kids who are arguably some of them are bigger than me, and you're just kind of holding this thin line of like, staff versus, I'll say students, but that environment was one where we were kind of 24/7 for weeks on end. And so, the red kind of buttons that we've got, they all get pushed. And so you've got to get a sense of how to not remove them, because you really can't hide those. You've got to just kind of de-escalate them, or kind of unwire them to at least the point that you can. I think none of us is going to be entirely unpushable, but the more that you can kind of pre-game that, the more, in truth, the more you mess that up and try to come back. I think the better. So I think a big one for me was noticing, when I'd start to get kind of a bit of a smirk going, that would telegraph someone who's paying attention that they've kind of got me, like that I'm getting into like, I'm belittling this person in this moment, and so that smirk was one of my telltales of that. And that took some time to work on that physical sign, because maybe I've been ticked off, but I don't need to telegraph that. I probably need to work on what's going on for me in that, because I'm gonna get ticked off all kinds of times. It's something on that, some of the tells.
No, that's great. And I'd love for us to continue, spitting out these insights and ideas on how to create self-awareness. But what was it for you that somebody pointed that out to you, or did you notice it yourself, or what? How'd you know about the smirk is what I'm asking.
Yeah, it was something, I think, even as a kid, I think my dad would say like, "Oh, you're doing that thing," and I, of course, had no idea. Like, so even as a kid, it was pretty inherent to kind of how I responded to like being frustrated by, either just basically the conflict. And then it bore out. It was something that carried through. It became my go-to. So unchecked, it was my response.
Now, facial expressions are one of those things that I touch on pretty heavily in the video, because it all comes from Carol Izard's work, and his research shows that somewhere between like 87 and 92% of the time, we can tell which emotion somebody's experiencing by what they wear on their face, one of the 10. And so smirking actually is usually a sign of contempt. Sometimes it's humor for sure, you're happy or whatever, but yeah, that's probably if I had to venture guess, it's probably a defense mechanism to create space between you and the person. It's an othering, right? You're like, oh, I don't need time for you. Like
Absolutely.
you're condescending me or whatever. That's interesting. Well, good
Yeah,
catch.
that's where it comes from. Like, it felt exactly, or it feels, I'm not over it, but it feels exactly like I'm condescending to the other person, and I'm definitely trying to put something in between, a one up, one down dynamic, when I'm already feeling a little bit pressed.
Yeah.
I have a story. Excuse me. I have a story, but actually, when the emotions got the better of me, because it wasn't instantaneous. So, with my company in the summertime, we transitioned to more of like a high adventure style, where so one of them is that we take some of the kids whitewater rafting. Well, in one of the trips last summer, we were taking the kids down the river, and this one it goes anywhere from like class 2 up to class 4 at the very end. In the middle of it, there's a small section where, like, if you want to jump out of the boat and swim, you can, but then you got to quickly get back in within probably like 300 yards. And the kids and stuff were like, "Hey, throw me, throw me." So, I'm sitting there grabbing, I'm just kind of like tossing them out of the boat as far as I can, because like the other person in the boat didn't have the strength. And I mean, I'm having a blast. Something about me, though, is I have a fear of water that I cannot see the bottom of. And so it's just like I can go swim, and it's just I don't enjoy it. And so I toss this last kid, turn around, this kid just like tackles me in my chest and throws me off the raft. So I come up and I scream, "What the F are you doing?" Mind you, he's clients and I'm therapist. I quickly regain my posure in the sense that, like, leave me alone. they then have drowned me trying to get me in the boat, so I have to basically swim the raft to the shore to get myself back in, and it was a bad time all around. But the thing about that I was able to model is that basically with these kids is that, hey, yes, I lost my cool. I then apologized for like cussing, but I was able to model for them, hey, you're allowed to lose your cool and then come back and compose yourself and be like an actual human being. And this doesn't have to mean just because I cuss you out, we have to get into a fight. Because a lot of these kids, you start running your mouth, and the next thing you know, fists are flying.
That's awesome. That's such a great demonstration of modeling forgiveness and grace and apology and humility. And it really closes the shame guilt loop too. So guilt and shame are two of our 10 core emotions. And in the framework of sadness is, so all these emotions, by the way, are instructive. They're neither good nor bad. People look at the list and be like, there's 7 negative ones and 3 positive ones. That's not really what it's about. It's about an information gathering based on what the environment is telling you. So sadness's job is to tell us that our expectations were not met. Shame's job is to tell us we failed to meet somebody else's expectations. So we caused disappointment in somebody, right? So then guilt comes in behind shame and says, go fix it. And the reason for that is we want to maintain contact with our tribe. And I explain this deeper in the videos. But what happened there is you modeled, you got pissed probably to cover over the fear of like falling into the water for sure. And also the disappointment in somebody like, surprising you and throwing you overboard when you didn't want that. You didn't expect it, right? Your expectations were not met. And you communicated that. And that person probably felt embarrassment or shame, like, uh-oh, I pissed off the therapist. And then there was probably an oops, sorry. And then you went, oh, I totally acted out of line, meaning you again violated their expectations of professional decorum, we'll say. And then you apologize so that you close the shame guilt loop and reconcile and move forward. And that's critical to model, especially for children and teenagers, because I think oftentimes they see adults in this like infallible role where it's like we're supposed to do no wrong and we're always criticizing them and getting them into line and telling them what to do. So if we can screw up, and you alluded to this in the beginning, if we can screw up, apologize, make amends, and move forward, it then is an invitation for the recipient or the audience to say, oh, I could probably humble myself and seek forgiveness too. And that's really powerful. I'm glad you shared that.
And the one thing, like I think I talked about this last episode, is that I like that story has made its rounds. Like there's kids that aren't even involved in that trip that know that story. It's like it's the therapist that lost his cool kind of deal. Like
It
it is
lives
like I'll
on.
own it. Yeah, it just lives on. I'll own it. But like I do enjoy the fact of like making the like we're not unfallible beings. Like we're just another person that just happens to have specialized training in this area. Because it kind of like
Yeah.
removes that mystique and mystery about like who we are.
Yeah, I'll tell you one clue for me, and then I want to ask you guys about mirror neurons, but one clue for me, now that you guys have shared some stories, is like I tend to I don't have an RBF, resting bro face as I call it. No, I don't have an RBF per se, but when the situation or the topic gets very serious, I know that my eyebrows tend to furrow and I my jaw tightens a little bit, and it can look like I'm angry, or look like I'm judging. So I have tried really hard to keep my facial expression as interested, like upper, like raised eyebrows and or neutral as possible. So like it looks like I'm curious and inviting them to go on, because I don't want to shut down conversation if the person talking thinks that I'm condescending, like DB, or getting angry, or judging them. That would be really bad for therapy for sure, but also for other relationships. Do you guys know about mirror neurons? Have you studied this at all? DB's nodding.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say no. I'll own it. Nope.
All right, let's do some teaching. DB, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, basic, right? It's basically when if we look at kind of two people responding to the same thing at the same time, and I guess one would be that I hear it most commonly discussed, I guess maybe pop conversation, is that basically what I'm putting out there, the other person is reflecting. And so I have a strong ability to kind of both be kind of sucked into the dynamic that's already there, as well as influence the dynamic that's going on between two people. And so I've also heard it kind of in the animal psych side of things, basically when two two animals are experiencing the exact same phenomena. One is responding, one is reacting to that, and so very, very similar um, in that kind of action reaction. And so if a person is kind of leaning in to being interested and kind of giving a lot of positive verbals, the tendency is for the other person to lean in, give a lot of positive verbals. Or if the classic example would be if I cross my leg and sit back, you can look within a couple seconds, and if I'm sitting in a group of people, most people will then sit back and put their knee up. So the opportunity there is to really guide the flow of the room, or
Yeah.
to, if we don't know what we're doing, to really make it worse.
So I'm aware of this then. I just did
Yep.
not either remember it was called that or just never heard it when I heard it. But yeah, I've heard of this before. We studied it in grad school and we've done trainings and stuff like that and like various different things.
Mirror neurons are very important, not just for body language and influencing group and interpersonal dynamics, but they can actually be used, like DB alluded, to guide people into things. And this goes back to, I don't know if you guys remember the story of Clever Hans. It was the horse that could tap out and count. It was like
No,
post
yeah.
World War I. Yeah, they had this horse, and they were doing some studies or whatever, and this horse, they what they did is they trained him to like tap. They'd say 2 + 2 = 4, and he'd like tap 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 tap, and everybody thought this horse was brilliant. Well, it turns out the horse was picking up cues from the trainer, and when the trainer would get close to the number, the horse would tap the number, and it became a feedback loop of reward and behavioral conditioning. But later on, some Italian scientists who were very clever, they started looking at this in primates, and they would make the monkeys do certain things. And one day they were all sitting around at lunch, and they weren't really in the experiment room, but they had the camera rolling. And what the mirror neurons do is if you're provided a stimulus, your brain will pick up the stimulus before your body moves to it, right? So they would feed these monkeys, and they'd get them to get into patterns and whatnot of reaching for foods. And so what they noticed was that somebody just fortuitous circumstance, however it ended up happening, the scientists are all in a room, they're eating lunch or whatever, and monkeys are away on the other side of the glass. One of the scientists just happens to be watching the monitor while another one reaches for an apple or a cup of coffee or something. And as it picks it up, the monkey also reached as though there were the object in front of it in the other side of the glass. And they went, "Whoa, what did you guys just notice that?" So then they started studying this stuff, and that's how we came to know that mirror neurons influence behavior even when there's not a stimulus present. So when we're talking about, emotional connectivity and wearing things on our face, it's really critical for those of us in the therapeutic world to make sure that when we're creating the environment that's positive and comfortable and non-judgmental and conducive to change, that we comport ourselves in such a way that we're not steering the conversation, right? Because we can very, very easily, especially with people who are vulnerable and seeking help, but also in our private worlds, for those of you who are non-clinical, which I assume is most of our audience, when you're talking to your spouse, the way that you wear your facial expression can absolutely influence the response that you get based on what you're feeling. They will pick it up, and we will experience this throughout the rest of our lives, whether we're in the grocery store checking out our groceries or whatever, or we're in a critical incident where we may have to deploy a firearm to stay safe. The more that we can wear on our face an accurate communication of our emotional expression, the better off we're going to be in getting a person to respond appropriately and not escalate the situation. So I'll just leave that hanging there and let you guys respond.
Well, yeah, consider the usefulness of that, right? So if you're looking to guide a scenario in a positive direction, if it's, for example, a self-defense or something's getting heated, that's probably a better example, is getting there early. Something's getting heated. I've got the opportunity to just look like I'm evaluating and kind of go into the maybe Jake face. I'm gonna furrow a bit, and the tendency, there he goes, right? So like the other responders probably gonna be like you are you disrespecting me? Like, are you challenging like what's going on in this? If I'm already kind of going down that road and then somebody adds to it, or at least that's how I'm going to take that. If I'm kind of looking for confirmation of my own frustration, I'm going to find it probably, unless you've got kind of the wherewithal to kind of come into that heated scenario. And yeah, you're doing a bit of negotiation in that moment. Like, how can I slowly, without being kind of Ned Flanders in the moment, like actually slowly guide this in the direction, for those who got that, like 5 points for those who got it. Because it's so disjointing and disjarring if you have somebody totally opposite. I mean, unless we all laugh at the guy and it kind of dispels the moment, which can happen. It's probably not what I would go with, though. I'd want to kind of slowly navigate that towards something a bit more harmonious. And then the other, I think, Jake, your great example was, in the actual therapeutic environment. It would be very rare that I'd be trying to go there unless the person was in a pretty rough spot, and I'm trying to kind of get us to a bit more calm in this moment. But I'm not looking to do a mind trick in this, or to have the outcome that I want, purely.
I don't work as much in this capacity anymore with with patients at all, because I'm just very busy. But with kids, I know Eddie does, and I still do when I'm coaching Little League, so it has some importance there. And we have children. DB and I have our own children. But Eddie, talk a little bit about how important it is for adults to leapfrog their thinking in advance to try to predict an outcome, so that we can tease out what we want from children, not only modeling good behavior and good communication and appropriate interactions, but also trying to guide and sculpt them into places of comfort, maybe when they're not in comfort.
So I don't actually work with children anymore. Thankfully, my position that I've had for the last 2 years is mostly with adolescent teenagers, but I did
children.
used to work with a lot of children. But no, the point of that, I think, is a lot of times when we're dealing with teenagers, it's a lot of raw emotion, and so having to understand this, understand where they're going with this emotion, is one, going to be telling of how this outcome is going to be in this conversation, and two, when it comes to actually working with teenagers and children generally, like teenagers and stuff, the correct modeling of how to respond and behavioral wise, I think, is the hardest aspect, because these, say you're really angry, this anger is not going somewhere, so you need to be able to help them understand where this anger is going to be going to, and how the way you portray yourself in the situation can either make the situation better or worse. Like the resting I keep wanting to say the other word, but the resting face.
Let's call it resting beard face. Yeah,
we'll go with resting beard face. The resting beard face. Like in that situation, that can infuriate someone, and you could just be, that's your normal face, and then so playing, I have to deal with it. Like talking about DB, you're talking about it's hard for you, like the smirk. I find myself doing that a lot, and I have to catch myself. It's not because I'm trying to be insulting the person. Sometimes what my client's telling to me, it's a ridiculous situation and it's funny, but it's just that, not trying to hide that smirk. And I kind of get away with it some, because most of my clients are on the spectrum, so they don't really pick up my facial cues, which does give me a little leeway, but not all of them are.
So I think it's really important for teenagers, especially, but also the ones who are struggling with picking up social cues. I don't want to put everybody on a spectrum who struggles with social cues. That's not all what I'm saying. I think there's a tendency in culture to go that way these days, but you can just have an underdeveloped sense of emotional functioning because of trauma background in childhood, or neglect, right? Just simple, nobody's paying attention to you. Parents aren't there. Nobody's available. Maybe the environment wasn't one that was allowing you the freedom and opportunity to explore your emotions in such a way that you get to ping off of people and adjust and correct course and move forward in life. So I don't want to spectrumize everybody at all. You can get into adulthood and really not know how to navigate good situations well, simply because you were bullied, so point being, that demographic, the teenagers or people who are authentically, genuinely on a spectrum, I think that it becomes more important for us to express accurately with our face and label it as we're saying it. But I didn't mean to cut off DB there.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about how often, and so if you haven't done this, do this. Go to the playground and watch kind of parents interact with their kids. And you get one kid who falls down, and immediately they turn and look at their parent, and they're looking for, how should I respond in this moment? Like they haven't like biffed it that hard before. And like it's fascinating to watch the parent that looks like encouraging and like, you got this. Kid gets up and they got that because that's what they just learned. And there's nothing other than that initial look over at the parent, or babysitter, whoever's watching for that time, and they're looking for, how do I respond in this moment?
It's
And
the classic, the baby doesn't cry till it sees mommy, and her face, or their faces like tore
Freaking
up
out,
or something.
yeah, it's fascinating because it's just a human reality, and it happens over and over. So it's, I charge people to just go, if you're, next time you're in a public place, just watch people's expressions and figure out what's the story at the next table at the restaurant. Like what's happening in this from the expressions. And I find that fascinating, just to have a
And
sense like, ooh, this isn't going well. Um,
the I'm not trying to say like raising kids is like raising a pet, because I'll get like attacked in the comments, but raising young children and raising like dogs is similar in the sense that like the same thing, like when you're interacting with like a young dog or something, like you're training up how they read your cues, like they read your body language, your cues, and they feed off that. So like if you have a dog that does something bad and you come at them like aggressively, they're gonna dopamine loop and they're gonna feed on that aggressiveness. Whereas you can just come to them like you correct, like, nope, we do not do this. You show them the correct behavior, then you can get them out of this aggressive behavior. And it's the same way with the kid. They'll model your behavior based on how you interact with them.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
we could
critical
definitely
point. Go ahead.
we could definitely talk long on it, because we talked about kind of the spectrumization, or the tendency to drive that direction, and then talked about the parental feedback. And so we won't go on this, for this is definitely a topic for another time, but these windows of time, 0 to 3, of parental response, and how does, if my parent is here, and every time I look up to my parent for a response, they're here,
Yeah,
which
to
is
the
the
listening
thing.
audience who can't see DB, he's holding his phone in front of his face.
Absolutely. So yeah. So you're holding the phone in front of the face, the kid's looking up at you, and no response, nothing happens. And that's pivotal. That makes a difference over time.
For the people who are listening who aren't familiar with the still face experiment,
Mm,
it's eh, it's creepy and it's
terrifying.
heart-wrenching and it's nothing I ever want to see again. I've seen it too many times. I don't ever want to see it again. I'll probably end up having to see it at some point in my life. But basically, in a nutshell, what it shows is a baby who's crying for attention. Mom is instructed in this experiment, and it's videoed, to do a number of things. One is match the emotion, one is to soothe, and one is to keep a still face. And when the still face, which we in our world call flat affect, it's spelled like affect, but it's pronounced affect when we're talking about the emotion that you wear on your face. When you have a flat affect, it tells the audience that nothing really. It's like you're not there. In fact, you could be very cold and departed. And watching this baby continue to escalate, it when mom is not giving response is heart wrenching. Like it is so hard to watch. Um, and that's essentially what we're doing when we're on our phones. When our kids are in 0 to 3, like DB highlighted, is critical, but it goes beyond that.
Oh
I've
yeah.
got an 8 and a 6 now, and I don't know that I've probably carried greater shame for things that I've done in my past that I'm not proud of, but there's very few things that made me feel more hollow as a man and as a dad than when my kids were asking me to engage them in the dinosaurs or the Transformers or the coloring book or the story that they're reading or whatever it is. And I'm on my phone. And in my mind, what I'm doing on my phone is very important, right? It's like if they ask me for something and I'm just scrolling Twitter, I'll set it down, right? But if I'm typing an email, there have been times, far more than I'm proud to admit, where I say, hold on a second. I'm doing something. And sometimes it doesn't come off as kindly as the way I just said it there. Sometimes it's, can't you see I'm doing something? And then immediately I just go, that was wrong. And mind you, I do this for a living, right? I'm a marriage and family therapist. I teach people how to parent for a living, and I myself am making these mistakes. So that's to say, it's okay if you make the mistake, just don't keep making it, right? But I'll tell you when the real pivotal moment was when Elijah, my oldest, this was a couple of years ago, and it's not the only time it happened. It happened a few times when he'd come up and say, "Dad, Dad, Dad," and he'd stop himself. He'd go, "Oh, sorry, you're doing something," and he'd walk away. And I was like, that is not what I need in my home at 7 o'clock at night. Like it almost brought me to the point of tears one time because I had a bunch of other stuff going on in my life at the moment, but um I was so embarrassed that I was not present for my kids. And what we're doing when we're on our phones, we criticize kids a lot for being on their devices, but the adults are modeling it. What we're doing is the still face experiment to our own children, and it's pushing them away. And I honestly believe that that lack of emotional connectivity, that lack of validation, that lack of authentic presence is one of the driving forces behind our child, teen, and young adult mental illness epidemic, because what it creates is a lack of connectivity leading to the children not believing that they matter. And so then they reach for something that makes them feel like they matter, that makes them feel connected. And that could be really disastrous things. People online who don't have their best interest in mind. It could be a bad habit or a hobby that they pick up. So we really, really need to be mindful of how we're communicating our emotions on our face, but also just being present, not staring at a screen.
Yeah, I mean, it was what Dr. Jordan Peterson was talking about. He mentioned that your job by 4 years old is to teach your child to be sought out to play games, and so and they learn that in that 0 to 3 phase. There's so many neurons being formed, so many pathways in the mind being formed, and there is a thing like neuronal shunting. This pathway isn't needed, so we're gonna cut that. We're gonna move this other direction, and so of course, we can talk about neuroplasticity, and it's important that we do that. We can find new ways that the mind is incredibly powerful and adept. However, that takes time and training. And that period 0 to 3, where we may be on our phone and not attending a child, it makes everything else that much harder. And some things you just can't go backwards for. So, we can spend a lot of time later. I think there's kind of the kind of economic example. Kind of you can spend, a penny now, or how much are we gonna have to spend later, in dollars to repair the issue that we could have just done right the first time. And so I know we're talking about kind of de-escalation and the range of these things. I think a big part of that is recognizing that these cues matter, and they don't, not just when we're in an escalated moment, but also as parents, as coworkers, as as lovers. These things matter.
Yeah, and also acknowledging that nobody else had your upbringing, right? So there may be people who are way more emotionally in tune, and you're not, right? And you don't know what's going on, and you don't know how to deal with that because vulnerability is something you haven't practiced because your environment taught you that being vulnerable got you whacked instead of validated, right? And you do that long enough, you end up with something called a personality disorder, perhaps. But the idea is that if we can be mindful that not everybody's going to be where we are, and it's our job to meet them and not the other way around. I think we can more intentionally go out of our way with compassion to engage people in a conversation that's meaningful to them through their lens, and so far as we can, pretend to be them, which I know is very challenging, but it requires an emotional maturity on our own part even to go there. Just like, Eddie working with these kids, he has to know himself well enough to teach them. He can't just wander in there knowing nothing about himself and then try to impart some knowledge, because they're going to pick up on that inauthenticity and it won't work, right?
And they
You've
will
probably
call
experienced
you
that.
out in a heartbeat. I
They will.
One of my interns learned that the hard way. I told them don't make up a story, and they were called out hard. I gave them fair warning.
A lot of times our egos won't allow us to receive that feedback either. I'll never forget this moment. Again, okay, so everybody fill your shot glasses. Christian Conti taught me once
I'll be
that
drunk by the end of the show.
yeah, you just you drop the rope. You don't engage in a power struggle or a rope pulling event with somebody. So you yield to them. You lean in. And this moment was when I was working in adult drug court. I had a um, bunch of people in a group who were facing prison time for drug charges, and they were doing alternative sentencing, which meant that they would come into our program, take their counseling, go to their groups, whatnot. And I was brand new on the job. This is probably my second group, maybe. And group, put that in air quotes. The group was like 22 people. And that's not a group for those of you who are listening. That's more of a class, but we called it a group because we had too many people to serve and not enough clinicians. But anyway, I'm in this big group and I'm introducing myself and we're going around the room. And one of the guys starts getting snotty and he's like, "What are you going to teach us? You're a normie. I could tell you're a normie." And there's this really interesting thing in the drug and alcohol recovery community where they tend to one up each other. It's like, well, you haven't done the drugs that I did, or you didn't do them long enough, or it's like there's this weird
Mhm.
ego battle to try to get their hand on top. And there's ideas about why that happens. We don't have to get them now, but the point was I was clearly very much being challenged as being an outsider to the group, and yet I was brought in to help. And they sniffed me out real quick. And so, borrowing from yield theory, I dropped the rope. I met him where he was and said, "You know what? You're right. I haven't. I've experimented with a couple things, but that doesn't really matter. I never been in your position. I've never trafficked. I've never faced prison time. And if that's really important to you, that you need a counselor who's going to have gone through all the experiences you have and walked exactly your life, I'm probably not it. What I can offer you is I've got some book knowledge. I'm currently in school because I was at the time I was an alcohol and drug counselor, but I was currently in school for my graduate degree in marriage and family therapy. I said, going through school now, this is part of my experience in order to graduate. But if that's important to you, I'm probably not the right guy. But I do think I can offer something. And you could have heard a pin drop in the room because I didn't engage in the ego battle. I was secure enough in my lack of knowledge and experience to openly say it. And after it was amazing. It shifted the whole conversation. I think it shifted my whole reputation for the entirety of the program when I was a part of it for almost a year. But immediately after that group broke, I had probably 5 or 6 people come out and go, "Man, I totally want to be on your case list. I want you to be my counselor. The way that you shut that guy down, you didn't even shut him down. You just like let it go." And that just means that you have so much more. And I was like, thanks. I was like, this whole thing. like I didn't know how to handle that compliment, which was another issue of my own insecurity. But it told me that it worked, right? I had this theory in my head that if you just let go of the rope, openly acknowledge your own deficiencies, um, and don't get into an ego battle, then you de-escalate the fight. And sure enough, it happened. So it was neat to be able to put that into practice and watch it work. And it turns out, about 2.5 years later, I ran into that same guy. He and I clicked really well for the groups that we were in, probably because of that incident. But later, I met him out at one point. I was with my family at a local pub, and he was there, and he's like, "Hey, Jake," and I was like, "Hey, Mike, that's all." And he's like, "What's going on?" He remembered the first time we met, and he said, "Man, you were the best counselor." And he gave me a short story about how he's doing really well in life and stuff, and that was really cool. But he says, "Man, that first day, I was ready to just beat you up and make you a fool in front of everybody. And you didn't let it happen." And he says, "I ended up being the fool, and I realized I had a lot to learn." I was like, "Oh, cool. I'm glad you remember that. That's really neat." So I haven't
That's
seen him in
about a
probably 10 years, but
that's
it was
probably
a
a
neat experience.
monthly it's probably a monthly occasion for me. I host a substance use and education class out of a local group home for kids, and most of the kids that go there are through Department of Juvenile Justice. And like we just had a new kid this past week, and the first question they asked me when I was introducing, because if there's ever a new kid, I kind of introduce like the whole shtick of the reason behind this group. Like, so like, are you an addict yourself? Nope, just have the knowledge. There may be a few in my family, but that's not what you want to hear. So what's your drug of choice? It's like, why are you teaching us if you're not an addict? It's the same reason why. Like it's like I think I'm trying to remember what I told him. I think it was something like the same reason you go to a classroom for someone to teach you how to fly or something like that. I think it's just like, hey, they have knowledge even though they may not have it completely or something. It's just like the whole thing, because like I knew every time that happens, they're always trying to like get into a fight with me. Like, oh, you can't like try to like one up and stuff like that. I was like, nope, like, I mean, and I always own with them. You don't have to be in this group. It does affect you negatively with your court counselor. You don't have to be in my group. The other people like learning stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine like the electrician that you want to go to is not the one who has problems in their house with their electrics. It's probably the one whose house, when you touch stuff, your hair doesn't stand up.
Yeah.
And yeah, that might be an example. I was also thinking about a personal trainer, but I'll skip that one. Yeah.
What it is funny. Apparently I don't think I'm mean in those groups. I just think like I hold kids accountable. Like you can butt up to this line, and if you butt up past this line, I'm gonna call you out. I have a reputation for holding kids to a line, so sometimes that comes off as mean to kids who's never been held accountable before. It's just I just hold every kid accountable.
What it is.
Yeah. But I had one kid come in there, same thing. They started challenging me, and they were doing like softball challenges in the beginning. I was like, I'm just letting it go. And finally, one of the girls in the group just kind of read over and was like, he's going to embarrass you. You don't want to do this. And he kept it up. And eventually he just like, I don't remember what I said to him, but afterwards, like everyone started laughing at him. And I was like, he just hit he got so low. I was like, I don't remember what I said to him. I think it had to been something like he challenged me, and I probably said something smart back to him. So like, I don't know why I have like that story, that reputation that was kind of followed, and that's been over a year ago. Like every kid still knows that story. I'm like, how do you guys know the story?
I think my reputation now is that I'm very straightforward, very direct, and no nonsense, right? And I don't mind having that. That's fine. I can also be compassionate too, but I think where it comes in is we're not attached to it. I don't carry the stuff home. I'm not living your life. I'm just
Mhm.
offering with an open hand. You don't want to take it. That's on you. That's okay. But you got a choice now. You can accept what I'm offering you, because ostensibly you asked. I didn't just barge into your life and start offering you
Yeah.
advice, right? You signed up, you signed a consent form, something. And if we offer with an open hand and we're truly not attached to it, then the information can just stand there. I think it's when we get defensive and insecure that we invite more of those attacks. Working inpatient too, the parents of the kids who were inpatient often would pick on me because I was an intern. Oh, you're only an intern. Oh, what can you possibly offer? I'm like, I don't know. You're the one with the kid in a prison hospital. I get to go home at the end of the day. Maybe I got something. I don't know. But yeah, hanging credentials on the wall and stuff like that. I think honestly, it sometimes sets us up for those attacks because we try to put out there like we're know-alls, and we're not. Uh, I personally, anybody who's listened to me long enough knows that I specifically will say I'm not going to give you a verbal resume, because that doesn't matter. I think the information should stand on its own, irrespective of the person delivering it. That often will disarm people too. And if I can say that honestly and authentically, then they go, huh, maybe there's more to listen to this guy because he's not forcing it on me.
One of the biggest things that I always tell I know we're kind of going off topic for a second, but this is the last thing I'll say on this topic and move on, is that like I always tell my kids that I work with that I'm going to hold you accountable to a line more accountable than your parents ever held you to. But as long as you're open and honest with me, I'll have your back no matter what. And it's been to the point where I've been in a courtroom arguing to the judge, like, no, you're wrong. We're not doing this. Like, I will go to bat for these kids as long as they're honest and open with me and what we're doing is appropriate. The second I've even told them, the second I can't trust you is the second you no longer have me at your back.
Bodes well too for raising children, raising your own children. It's harder when you live under the roof with them, because you don't work in shifts, right? It's easy for us to say, well, at the end of the day, I go home, and you stay here or whatever. But we have to be mindful that it's more difficult at home. And I think the reason is because the accountability light is always on. We don't get to just flip a switch and come in and pretend, which I think is why it's important to be consistent across all interfaces. But at home, your inconsistencies are going to be pointed out almost immediately by the people with whom you live. And work too. I mean, you work with people, colleagues, coworkers who see you way more frequently than the patient you see for an hour at a time. And if you're inconsistent or you're inauthentic, that will erode your own credibility, which is probably to your detriment. I mean, I know it's to my detriment if I do that. And so we got to work on being consistent, being authentic. That, of course, feeds into ego, humility, and more emotional functioning stuff. So that if you can authentically display your own disappointment, your own embarrassment, your own guilt, your own even excitement and happiness, that's okay. Like, you can model these effectively, and it tells other people that they themselves can do it as well.
I have a question for both of you guys, because I know how I handle stuff, kind of looping it back in. Do you guys find yourself using personal stories then to show model the stuff for people? Or do you guys use just like anecdotal knowledge? Like how do you handle it? Because I kind of mix in both depending on the kid and the client and stuff like that.
Yeah, I used a lot less earlier in the career, and it was probably just wasn't that they would be inappropriate. It's just that I didn't know how to measure them. I didn't quite know when to apply them. So like anything else that everything that we're saying, like we talked about last week, that, for example, in grad school, each of us is actually not just video recording, but we'd have to hand type, our transcription of every word, every pause, everything. And
Worst thing
so
ever.
so that in that moment, in those 45 moments, however you describe them, or whatever the session was, everything had to have a purpose and a reason that you could back up. And I think that's important because it speaks to the weight of what it is that we're doing and why a person is actually bearing their soul, or at least to the degree that they will, in session. And that at least for me, it starts a hesitation that, okay, everything has to be measured. And so over time, more and more of that, but at the same time, it's very similar. I guess the safest, this is something from avalanche research. I did a lot of work in kind of human factors psychology, for example. So like human factors for avalanche, the safest folks on the mountain in the backcountry are those who have just finished the av course, not the old timers. Now, it doesn't mean that they're risky. It just means that we tend to kind of gravitate away. And so they're not the most skilled on the mountain, and they're not the ones you necessarily want to call on when stuff hits the fan, but they're just dialed down in it. Like they don't want to screw up the steps, and they're staying by the formula. It's the same for grad students in counseling. Typically the most, if they kind of take assessments on, okay, who's following to the T the way that we want you to practice, well, it's typically, first year, second year grad students, typically, because they are so afraid of kind of going beyond that. And it doesn't mean that they're a good clinician. That doesn't mean that they're connecting with people. It means what they're measuring, they're ticking all the boxes on that. So I
By the
bring that
book,
up.
you're the most appropriate therapist by the book.
Absolutely, by the book, which isn't well, we could discuss that. Is that a negative? But what I would say is that I've become more and more comfortable with the anecdotes and when to bring them in and when to kind of, let the person know to a much greater deal. Like this is, oh yeah, you've got this paddling race coming up. At the age 15 for each of our kids, we have kind of a rite of passage at different ages for each of our kids. I'm going into a spiel here, that for each of our kids. And at age 15, they join me for a multi-day ultra marathon paddling race. And, that's coming up. We're really excited about that. And, so I'll get kind of a range of responses, of course, but usually I get somebody to say, thank you. It's great to hear a bit more about your life. Because we're not used to dropping the veil, and most of our clients, most of the people who sit with us are used to us maintaining such a veil or a cone of secrecy around our own personal lives. And it's just, to the degree I think we're doing it out of our ethics, I think that's probably okay, but it's a bit disingenuous because we all know we're still people.
I want to give
This
my answer,
past
but
year.
I want DB to explain a little bit more about when you say your 15-year-olds, your kids, what you're talking about adventure therapy?
Oh, sorry. My personal kids. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow,
Yeah.
that's cool. Do you do something similar with the groups that you work with too? Are there
Yeah,
various
but
rites of passage?
yeah. So, for example, some of the trips that I lead are entirely rites of passage, and so it's kind of father and father and son, or whatever the dyad would be, the pairing would be. So some of them are entirely around. This is rite of passage around, maybe it's 13 or whatever the parent is kind of deciding. Kind of passage from one thing to the next, so that, which is certainly another conversation that culturally in the West we really don't have any of those other than getting a driver's license, voting, going to jail, and 21 you can drink.
You
So
go
those
through
are
the rite of passage of going to jail. Did you guys do that.
I,
Teasing.
I got paid, thankfully, but um, yeah, I worked for Department of Corrections, a couple different states, but um, yeah. So at 15 for each of our kids, the Palmer kids, and at 10 and 13 as well, they have different rites of passage, and so it's a storied thing that each of them looks forward to and doesn't share all the details for the younger kids, but enough to kind of tease the story.
I am totally going to pick your brain offline, or maybe, I mean, even here you can share what those things are, because I think that that's something that we need to reinvigorate into our culture. And I mean, we're working with the gun community, right? Like,
Yep.
if anybody, they'd probably be the first ones to want to try this. It's not like we're reaching out into some city dweller who's, got surrounded by a bunch of opulence or something. I think that with our demographic, our listening audience is probably more inclined to do that kind of thing. So, I mean, share at your own comfort level, but I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think that we should all integrate into our own families rites of passage. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
well, I mean, to that, I mean, so we, after years and years of working, in adventure therapy, and I still do, we'd work with teens and families, and similar to what others had shared, you kind of get that dynamic of maybe the parent saying, "Hey, can you fix my kid?" And I'm like, well, no, maybe, but ultimately they're coming back home, right? So the dynamic of work is with the parent, is with the family, and so a lot of our work these days has been trying to curate those lessons that we have done over the last couple decades, and then teach them to parents, not teach them so that their parents can say, "Hey, kid, you need to do this," but rather, um, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, whoever's parenting at home, here's some of the tips and tricks. In fact, we put together a 12-week curriculum for adventure-based parenting, but um, on that very topic, basically, how do you live out this ethos, recognizing that you are all a functional team. You all have different roles. Your job as parents is to be the guides or the facilitators of this thing, but you're not the boss of it. Just like I'm never the boss on trail. I may be the one who's identified to be the person, but I can't do everybody's job. I need the team to do their jobs. I mean, I can, but it makes for a really crummy trip. Everybody's sitting around. So at age 10, for example, and if there's a lot more going into it, because you don't want to just all of a sudden at 10 show up in the backcountry, but at age 10, they'll do an overnight winter camping trip with their mom. And so Greta's really dialed. She and I've led treks for years and years together. So it's really special time. They do on an overnight trek with mom in the backcountry in the winter. So that's a great time to put into practice a lot of the stuff that they've learned, just on our family trips, how to stay warm, how to stay dry, how to deal with, condensation, all the different little tips and tricks, and fire and all that, and sleeping warm as well. And then age 13, they'll do a multi-day river or, multi-day paddling trip with me, but not a race, nothing. It's just fun. We're going to go multi-day, and just the two of us. And so that's where I really hand a lot of the navigation their direction. We go over the maps together, maps or charts. We go over food systems, and they are the co-driver of that trek. It's not dad is taking you, it's that we are going, and you're 13. Like, you could be an apprentice to somebody if we weren't in 2023. You'd be apprenticed and out the house, or married at this point, potentially. So at 13, you're my co-leader on this thing, and we split it up. And then at age 15, that's the ultra marathon, paddling race. So several hundred miles nonstop, either in the Yukon or the Missouri, or other, big races. And that's where we grind that out. It's a pain tour. And everybody just kind of lives this this ethic of like, this is something we do. We work our tails off. We don't sleep for days. We finish the race, and we got a story to tell.
That's really cool. I did Boy Scouts growing up, but nothing quite to that extent. I'm jealous.
I had the privilege, my post before here was I was professor of outdoor studies with University of Alaska, and kind of directed that department. And so it's my moniker, backcountry professor is kind of still an homage to, I still teach a little bit. But my more important mission these days, and far more fun, is working with my kids, and not with the dean and not with the provost. So it's far more important to be in private practice, to be working with my actual kids. And then with those, I mean, Jake, you give a nod to this earlier, that, I don't feel the need for everybody to agree with me or to like what I have to say. And so I can put it out there. You can come along, or you can glean from some of this, or you can go a different direction, and that's fine. I just don't feel the need to compel. And so I think it gives far better outcomes, for me, because I'm not invested in everybody liking me, which that's been a struggle, and I'm not done with that. I'm not saying I've achieved that fully, but man, it's so nice to start setting that down.
When you get there, when you have achieved it fully. Eddie, what did you ever write a passage?
So for mine, was competition shooting. Growing up, there was different ages where I would get like a different gun. I knew like at 5 years old, I was given a BB gun. And I knew at 8 years old, I would get a 22. And I think it was 9, I was given a shotgun. And then 13, I was given my first real hunting rifle, being able to go out with dad. But the big one for me was at 15, I could finally start competing like in competition shooting with my dad. Part of that was that's the age that the organization would allow you to join compete. The other was that was the so at 14 he started training me. I mean, I've been shooting for a while, but he started like legit training me. Like if we were going to the competitions, hey, you're no longer allowed to like go out and play with the kids all day. Like stay up here with me throughout the whole day. We're gonna show you how it's all going like. And so that way at 15, I could finally actually shoot and compete beside him, and that was a big moment for me because I'm no longer just a kid. I am now like a competition shooter, and consequently, I actually won my first title that year. So that was a huge, cool milestone to go from like this. I was last year, I was just a kid playing around, to this year, people know who I am.
That's awesome. The ones I can remember were in 6th grade, we did a desert survival and a winter survival course where we went out in the desert and we constructed shelters or whatever, and then we came back. It was only a day. And then in winter we went up to the mountain and we dug snow caves, and we're all, 10, 11 years old. That was pretty cool. And I don't know that they do that anymore. Liability and the attorneys got a hold of it. But now that I've been reminded of that, thank you guys. I think I might encourage my kids' school to implement something like that. And then at 12, I went to um, hunter safety, got my hunter safety license, and my hunting license. And then at 14, I was allowed to drive with my dad. He started taking me out to drive. Now I couldn't actually get my learner's permit till 15 and a half, but you need some time to practice. You don't just jump into the front seat when you're 15 and a half and start driving. So I think now that you're reminding me of these things, I'm going to re-implement some of them and maybe even create some new ones. So I appreciate that from you guys. Getting back to personal disclosure, fill your shot glasses again. Was something that Christian Conti taught us in school was you only self-disclose to heighten rapport, not to make the session about you and your storytelling and to process whatever you still have left unprocessed. Obviously that could be abused. People can do mental acrobatics to say, oh, I was only telling that big long-winded story about myself to build rapport. And really you're working through your own trauma history on the other person's dime. But I think that to DB's point about how in the beginning of our careers, when we're in school, we're overly cautious because we're instilled with a lot of fear and hesitation and second guessing. And there is a little bit of deconstruction that goes on. I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional in grad school, whether they're just pointing out what our deficiencies in an effort to improve, but the consequence was that we didn't believe in ourselves at all when we got to the end. And I could speak pretty comfortably for most people in my program. And then as you go through experience and you get some more tutelage and training, the self-disclosures become more important and more judicious and more intentional. Like DB was saying, you do it with a purpose. And when I use that guideline, it serves as a check on myself to say, am I doing this because I want to brag, or I want to, tell somebody something that, you know, was cool or I'm still embarrassed about, or am I doing it specifically to build rapport? And I could tell you that the first time I did that was actually pre-grad school, when I was working in-home paratherapy. It's called PSR and BST work. I told a kid about how I was bullied constantly from third grade through roughly 10th-ish. And then that was the physical stuff. The physical stuff stopped junior year of high school, but the verbal stuff continued. And this kid I was working with, who was heavily bullied and had no self-esteem, and he was probably going to become a school shooter. They didn't have any firearms, so maybe you just improvised, but but he was really on a razor's edge. And when I shared that with him, it unlocked so much. He had no idea. I'd been working with him probably 7 or 8 months. And I finally broke down and I told him, I said, "Hey, you know, I've been where you are." He's like, "No, you haven't." And I said, "Yeah, let me share some stuff." And I shared stories just offhandedly without too many specifics about specific instances that I faced: being spit on, being kicked, being having things stolen from me. And his eyes just got wider and wider. And I said, "Yeah, man, this is how I can identify with a lot of what you're going through." And that improved our relationship tenfold. And I was so glad I did it. Later, I heard the adage of only disclose to heighten rapport. And I thought, oh man, in that moment, that's why I did that. I did it without knowing. I did it sort of unconsciously or subconsciously, but it worked really well. So if you're going to self-disclose, even parents to children, we should not be burdening our children with adult themes and adult issues. However, if you find it valuable to self-disclose to your children about some struggle that you overcame, it may improve your bonding with your children, if it's age appropriate, of course, right? So that's something to keep in mind too. And I appreciate you guys sharing. What was your plug for DB there? I saw something in the chat, Eddie.
No,
That
I
wasn't
popped
me.
it in. Hey, so you mentioned something I think is pretty huge. It's a whole conversation there, but maybe, or at least it's a good chunk of one. But I think it's something just to reiterate. Yeah, as parents disclose, it really is to build that bond, to build. Um, there's a kind of teachable moment in that versus just a verbal dump of something, or war
Yeah.
storying. I think a war story has a place, absolutely, but it has a place, right? It's for an audience, for a time, for a purpose. So it's the same deal. It's like that late night clubbing or whatever was happening from the parents. Yeah, there may be a time when that's an appropriate, and probably will be a time when that's an appropriate story for a kid. But that disclosure, ideally, meets ears that can hear it, versus sets an expectation that this is what kids do, which is a whole definitely another
Oh,
topic. How do we raise?
that's a great
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I mean, how we raise teenagers for the most part with this idea, like, how many times have you heard this? Like, oh, the teenage years, and I just think, really, you said that in front of your kid? Like, you've told every teenager in earshot that you expect them to be a screw up. That's the bar you've set for them, and that you're willing to say that's what I expect of myself as well. Like, man, what a gut punch. Now we know that there's going to be challenges, as societal challenges, of course, but I'm not going to speak that. There's no way I'm going to say, well, which, because then I've just said I'm excusing myself. Well, like, I'm not responsible, which is better way I could have said that, or more honest. I'm not responsible, but wow, look how messed up this is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
DBC,
glad you shared that.
DBC, we're talking about like the kind of moved around with like the venture based stuff. What is your program called, if anyone's ever interested?
Oh yeah, so it's adventure-based parenting, and we're at backcountryprofessor.com. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so a lot of these concepts are really around how do we set up the parameters, how do we set the expectations, and recognize that, yes, you're the parents, so you're in a position of authority and leadership, and that's a good thing. In fact, it's an incredibly good thing. So like any other good thing, we ought to be really, really responsible with it, and recognize the responsibility that comes with that thing.
I think a lot of parents really hear this stuff and they go, "Yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that." And then their own history's get in the way a little bit. They have insecurities. Maybe they never even saw it modeled for them.
Yep.
They know that there's some generational stuff they want to stop with their generation, but they don't know how to move forward, right? And I think that's my hope for our show and our continued coverage of these topics, is to create some enthusiasm for sure, but also some motivation and inspiration and confidence that even if you haven't necessarily personally experienced what we're discussing, hearing it and then asking for and soliciting feedback and advice on how to implement it, I think can be really critical. So, hopefully over the next, coming months and years, we can create a catalog of information where people can just paw through and apply some of this stuff to their life. Certainly, I teed this off with my emotional functioning video series, which I would love everybody to watch, not just because I narcissistically want YouTube clicks, because I don't really care, but because
It's really that.
I think
It's really that.
it really is. I'm sorry.
Please click like and subscribe.
Please smash that subscribe button. And hit the little alarm bell so you get notified. No, but it's because I truly want people to know this information. It doesn't do any good locked up in our heads.
Yep.
It does better when it's out in the public sphere and people are integrating it into their lives so that they can be better parents and we can raise a better generation. And we don't have to default to phrases like good teenagers. It's like, yeah, we know people go through adolescence. We know there's hormonal changes. We know that it seems like when they bend over at 14 to tie their shoes, their brain falls out of their head and doesn't return until 19. But we don't have to let that be the way. In fact, we can take an active investment into their lives so that it doesn't happen like that, right? While also knowing there's biological and physiological frustrations that accompany it.
We have a saying at my work. I work for a company called Heights. It's HIGHTS. But our saying at the company is all our parents that we work with are Heights kids that didn't have Heights. And so, like, if you're working with a family, just remember that a lot of times the families that you're working with are parents that were the same kid that you're working with that just didn't have the option of getting the help. So, like, we say, I say that a lot. To once it was told to me, I share it a lot with my interns, because like it's easy to get frustrated with the clients and stuff we're working with, especially their parents. Like, if you work as a clinician working with parents, just remember a lot of times you're dealing with someone who didn't get this as a kid, so now they're working with the only tools they know. So, like, try to keep that in mind when you're working with this whole family.
Really beautiful. And I think there's application for the gun community too, especially if you're in the instructor realm. Like I said, I took that CCW research course today, and it was so obvious to me who was nervous and who wasn't. And the instructor was not nervous. I wasn't nervous, but I remember being nervous the last time I went through 5 years ago, and for sure the first time, because all you do is you look around and you're like, everybody in here is better than I am. All right. Fortunately, with, continued exposure to the firearms community, and huge credit to Rob Pincus, honestly, because Rob can be a hard ass, but he's a compassionate hard ass. And I was put through a little bit of a crucible of sorts, learning a lot of cultural stuff about the gun community, certainly the politics and opinions, and then integrating it with my own practice. I realized that, like, a lot of this stuff has overlap, and being able to meet people where they are, to make them comfortable in the environment, certainly parenting, certainly at job, workplaces. If you can learn to read people, again, back to emotional functioning, learn to read people's emotions, see what they're carrying on their face. See, are they shaking their hands when they go up to the firing line? You as the instructor have an opportunity to step in and say, hey, breathe. It's okay. You're supposed to suck right now. That's why you're taking this class. I'm going to teach you to suck less, right? And then they make it humorous but also serious, and help guide them through that process. Being able to understand that children are just offspring of their parents, and maybe those parents didn't get the best upbringing themselves, is critically important. And I think it's really beautiful the way that you phrase that. Well, is that good?
Yeah, that was real good. The
hour and 10 minutes in. Go ahead.
We could go into little details about the emotions of actually competing and shooting and stuff like that, man, because we would keep going for another hour if we did this.
we should do that in a separate show. I think that would be really good, and I hope that we're taking notes on this. I know I'm
working on an article for that, for a magazine that I work with.
Good. What's that called, by the way?
So the one that this will be publishing with will be the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association's publication.
Okay.
The
Yeah,
the
I,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I like that people should know where they can find our stuff too. If we're producing literature or videos or other audio, they should know where to find this stuff so they can share it around. Because I don't know how many muzzle loaders are listening to this. I don't know how many muzzle loaders are listening at all because they're an inanimate object probably stored in a safe. But how many muzzle loader
I
shooting
don't know. There's
people
one
are
in a box
listening?
behind me that I got to finish putting together.
Is it listening?
It probably is.
Guys, be quiet. All the muzzle loaders are listening. But that's really cool. I didn't, I knew that from like 2 or 3 years ago when you mentioned it, but I'd forgotten. So I'm glad you mentioned that. You write for a couple of different publications. Um, so yeah, we want you to know this stuff. Well, I want to start. I want to continue the tradition of last time. So let's tell everybody what's one thing that we're taking away from today as you call it a therapeutic summary, I guess. But for me, I'll lead. I'll say that what I'm taking away is rites of passage. I really want to integrate intentional rites of passage. I think it's going to bring my family closer together. For sure, it's going to bring my wife and I closer together. And as soon as this is published, I'm gonna invite her to listen to it because hearing the way that DB explained that just stirred something within me, and I want to share that with all my close friends so that they can do it with their children too. So that's my takeaway. My takeaway is rites of passage. What are you guys taking away?
I'm stealing yours because while me and my wife don't have kids and we don't want kids, but we work with tons of kids. I'm definitely gonna like bring this up with the families I work with, just because thinking about how important these things were for me as a kid, between Boy Scouts, competing with shooting, and all these things. A lot of the kids I work with, they don't have that. And just think about how important these small steps were for me to make me a man. I think will greatly benefit these families. So I'm going to try to figure out a way to like even just the group home, because a lot of those kids are there for 90 days. So just trying to figure out ways to make these rites of passages even in the group home, like just try to figure out ways of integrating different things that I work with.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick on that, because the rite of passage, the idea is that this youth is becoming part of the community at a new level. They're becoming a participating member of the community, and that's the expectation. That's every culture throughout all time until recently. That was the expectation, and so the child would come back an adult, a participating member with responsibilities, and that is not a teenager. A teenager is this safe other space that's not very safe. And so the idea is that you don't strip the biology and the chemicals that are changing, because that of course is the case, and there's going to be mess ups, there's going to be all kinds of things. And so the idea of rite of passage is that we are holding you to a standard. But what I'm going to take away from this is kind of segueing where I'm going to go next, and with something that Jake was saying earlier, is that the real responsibility is for the guide, for the facilitator, for the parent, that they're the ones with the bigger responsibility in that. So it's not the teen's job or the child's job to fix themselves. It's a job for the parent to look themselves in the mirror, for the clinician, for the firearms instructor. You got to look yourself in the mirror and see where the obvious issues are, that you know where they are, and where the blind spots. Like you've heard of these things and you may not want to fix them. So you don't have to fix them all at the same time, but you need to identify what they are. Or I guess you don't need to. The world would be a better place if you did, and you'd certainly be a better person. We would each be better people if we held the mirror up and then honestly started taking one at a time.
Awesome. Good. Well, thanks guys. Appreciate you carving out the Friday afternoon. Normally we record these on Friday mornings, but because of my class, I forced everybody into afternoon. So, and for Eddie, it's now late.
7:30.
His time. Yeah. So on behalf of our sponsors, our platinum sponsors, on behalf of our Zephyr Wellness family that continues to make this possible for me, on behalf of you guys who are carving out your precious time to do it, and on behalf of all our Walk the Talk America family and supporters, thanks for listening, and we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.